let's get the Dolphins out of the way. Which I know may sound kind of weird given that they just won their 7th game in a row. But, like they have to, it's really funny because I give them a lot of credit for winning 7 games in a row. I mean, it's the NFL. You win 7 games in a row. Like, okay, that's really good. And it's the fact that it's never happened once in a season where you lose 7 in a row and win 7 in a row. Like, that's pretty awesome. And they've turned the defense around. The defense is playing much better than it was at the beginning of the year. But that's kind of it. The offense has been, they scored 13 points on offense against the Saints. Tua, the last 2 games, there's been a few throws you go, that was good. The rest of it's been there's been some bad interceptions. There's been some missed throws that could have been big plays, or just kept drives going. So, and they ran for over 100 yards against the Jets. Well, it was against the Jets. And also I looked it up. Duke Johnson had 3.5 yards after contact in that game, which means the offensive line wasn't doing that well. He was just making some people miss and breaking some tackles and doing some stuff, which credit to him. I mean, getting 100 yards that way is pretty tough. But it was funny because I thought Colin Cowherd had a pretty good segment on his show yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yesterday was Tuesday, right? Yeah, reacting to the Monday night game. He's saying there's a difference between quarterbacks you can win games with and quarterbacks that are elite that you could potentially compete for championships with. And Tua really hasn't done anything over the past 2 months to convince us that he's an elite quarterback. I mean, he's got the next 2 weeks he's playing the Titans and the Patriots. So, if he plays well against them, then maybe I think a little bit differently. But, it's just, I keep seeing these things where people when the first thing you talk about with your quarterback is, man, his completion percentage is through the roof. That shouldn't be the first thing you talk about. If it's one of the things you talk about, okay, but completion, and it was funny because I texted you on Monday night, during the Monday night game, I'm like, all these people talking about Tua's completion percentage, and I'm like, yeah, and that's gotten him 15 touchdowns and 9 interceptions this year. So, I mean, I don't know if I necessarily want to put a number on it, but if you can't get close to 30 touchdowns, then I don't know that you can consistently win games for several years in a row. Because I think defenses will just figure you out. Because Tua right now, he's having to do all this quick stuff, which to his credit, he should do because the offensive line sucks. But there's not, I haven't learned too much. I've learned there's a certain formula they can win with this year. But as we all know in the NFL, people figure stuff out and you have to there has to be a next level of things. And we haven't seen that. It still could be there. I don't think he'll ever be an elite quarterback, but I think he could be a quarterback that you could win games with him potentially year after year, but some of that's not on him. Again, it's the offensive line and them being able to run the ball. So, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think, look, I mean, they won that Saints game. The Saints were playing a 4th string quarterback. I mean, they won that basically. You probably felt the same way. Once they returned they got that pick 6, I'm like, okay, the Dolphins can win this game. If they're playing a mediocre to bad team and their defense scores a touchdown, they really should win those games. So,
I think, it's a 7-game winning streak, but let's not pretend that they've beaten, a bunch of playoff teams.
Jets twice, they beat Houston. They beat Baltimore when Lamar Jackson was struggling. They beat the Saints with a 5th-string quarterback. They beat Carolina, who God knows what the hell's going on with their quarterback situation. So, the games that they played against real teams, Buffalo blew them out. The other game, I'll give them credit. They were competitive in the first half against Buffalo, and that was mostly their defense. But, the Patriots were figuring things out at the beginning of the year, so that doesn't really count much for me. And then, I'm trying to think of the other games. They played a close game against the Raiders, so I'll give them credit for that. But, it hasn't been They should have. I mean, again, it's crazy because the NFL there's so much parity in the NFL. If they had just beaten Atlanta or Jacksonville or both, they'd probably be going to the playoffs. And those were games they probably should have won.
Not only
go ahead.
Not only could they go to the playoffs, they could win the division.
Exactly.
If you just flip one game.
Yeah. Again, I think a couple of podcasts ago, I gave my really highly cynical take of the Dolphins, where it's like, look, the way if they improve the offensive line, they could potentially be a team that, wins like 8 games a year, maybe a couple more, depending on some close games or depending on the schedule, having a bunch of teams you can beat. Them beating elite teams or competing with elite teams is just, I don't see it, So, but I mean, look, and I'll give the coaching staff credit. I mean, they turned the defense around. The offensive line, we were complaining about it the other night. We've been complaining about it all year. Why don't you leave more people back in to protect the quarterback? Given how bad, I mean, they were taking holding penalties in the Monday Night Football game because they can't block.
Yeah, and I texted you. Well, at least they're holding now. At least they're not completely missing guys and just getting free rushers. Like their improvement is, well, we're holding. We're at least breaking the rules to make sure the quarterback doesn't get hit. Which is, I guess, it's supposed to be an improvement. But yeah, this is a pet peeve. This has been a problem the entire season. We're 15 games in, and the offensive line we still don't have some kind of plan to give the quarterback any kind of protection.
That's why I think my overall take on this Dolphins regime now is the coaching is not terrible. It's not awful. It's not, well, there's aspects of it I really don't like. It's not necessarily terrible, but they're not great. Okay? They haven't done anything to convince me they're great. They've convinced me that they can be competent in certain aspects of the game, but
Yeah, I've said it a million times. It's not hard to be average in the NFL.
Yeah.
And they're average. It's actually kind of difficult to be the Detroit Lions or the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's
right.
That takes a lot to be that bad.
That's not knowing what the hell you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So listen, we're gonna find the good news is for the Dolphins, we're gonna find out what they're made of. They gotta play Tennessee on the road. They play the Patriots at home, and we'll see if they're for real.
And again, we'll talk about this more in the offseason, but I'll just say, looking ahead to next year, because I don't really care if they make the playoffs or not. I mean, it'd be cool, I guess, but they're not going to beat anybody. But looking ahead to next year, I'm basically, like I said this before, like, if you're going to trade for Deshaun Watson, do it, okay? If you're not, Tua's your quarterback and improve the offensive line, and then by Thanksgiving next year, if Tua's the starting quarterback, we should see if there's if the ceiling on him moves up a little bit from this year, because that might be possible if the offensive line is better. He's not going to be an elite quarterback, but if the ceiling moves up a little bit, then you could see, all right, we could potentially win with this guy for a few years. But, we'll see.